the real Sleeping Beauty. She was hidden to protect a kingdom's secret. Before the tower, before the thorns, before the spell twisted into myth, she was a child born into danger. They called her Oren, not Aurora, not Rose, not Briar. Oren of Eldrin, last daughter of a dying bloodline, and the final key to a secret that could collapse a kingdom. The kingdom of Eldrin was not like the others. It sat between two powerful empires, and for nearly 200 years it had been the thin blade of peace. But peace comes at a price, and Eldrin's price was secrecy. It kept no armies, no fortresses, no conquests. Instead, it held something far more valuable: knowledge, a library older than the kingdom itself, scrolls that predated kings, a vault beneath the palace, sealed and guarded, that held truths the world had chosen to forget. Some said it was full of lost treaties, others said it was cursed. But the truth was worse than either. The vault held history so dangerous, so destabilizing, that its mere existence could ignite war. Oren's mother, Queen Cirella, was not born to the crown. She had once been a map-maker, known for tracing ancient paths between worlds that no longer existed. She married King Valen not for glory or passion, but to merge intellect with power. Together they ruled not with iron, but with memory. They protected the vault, added to it, erased parts of it. But they always feared what would happen if the wrong person ever discovered what was inside. And then the seer came. He was old, older than any of the royal scribes, cloaked in dust, his eyes ringed with ink and red clay. He said nothing until they gave him fire and food, and even then, all he gave them was a single prophecy, spoken in a language so old the court needed 3 scholars to piece it together. The child born of sun and ink shall carry the key. She shall prick the truth, and kingdoms shall bleed. The scribes argued about its meaning. Some dismissed it as poetic nonsense, but Cirella understood. Sun and ink, royalty and a scholar's blood. Prick the truth. A reference not to a spindle, but to revealing something so sharp it draws blood. Kingdoms shall bleed, not metaphor, but consequence. If the vault was ever opened by the wrong hands, or the right hands at the wrong time, Eldrin would fall. The prophecy didn't speak of danger coming to Oren. It warned of the danger she carried. So the queen made a decision. They faked the child's death, announced it quietly. A small royal ceremony, a funeral without a body. No mourners, no whispers, just silence. That same night, the real child, barely hours old, was taken by a pair of riders to the sanctuary of the Asari, a remote stone stronghold carved into the forest cliffs of the north. It had once been a retreat for Eldrin's oldest order of chroniclers, and now it became her prison. She was not raised with dolls or lullabies. She was taught to listen for wind shifts in the trees, to read birdsong like letters, to memorize ancient texts carved into cave walls. The Asari never told her her true name. She was simply the ward. They claimed they were preparing her to be the eye that remembers, whatever that meant. She never saw other children, never saw the stars from a tower window, only from high cliffs in winter when the snow howled and the flames burned low. Still, they were not cruel. They fed her, protected her. But love was never part of the arrangement. And over time, her dreams narrowed. She stopped asking questions. Until the girl with the red hair came. Calla arrived during a snowstorm, half dead, teeth chattering, clothes soaked. A runaway from the southern cities, clever and untamed. She had wandered too far while escaping bounty hunters and found herself at the edge of a sanctuary she didn't understand. The Asari wanted to send her away, but Oren stepped forward for the first time in her life and said, "She stays." The elders said nothing. That was the thing about them. They never argued. They only watched. And so Calla stayed, and the world came with her. Calla told stories by firelight, of towns buzzing with noise and color, of forbidden books traded in back alleys, of whispers that the king was dying, and that he had no heir, of a hidden vault beneath Eldrin's palace that could change everything. Oren listened, and she began to burn. A question rose that had never been allowed. Who am I? When she asked the Isari, they looked at her like someone had spoken a forbidden word, and that was when she knew. The real spell wasn't cast by witches. It was cast by silence. The years of isolation, the half-truths, the missing pieces. She had not been protected. She had been dormant. They told her she was safe. But safety had stolen her story. She turned to Calla and said, "I don't want safety anymore. I want to wake up." They began to plan, studying maps, watching the way guards rotated, tracking sun patterns through the sanctuary's stained glass skylights. Oren was learning to break out, not with rage, but with precision. And then the rider came. Bloodied, frozen, collapsing on the sanctuary's stone threshold. He carried nothing but a sword wrapped in black velvet and a sealed letter burned with the queen's sigil. He died without a word. Calla and Oren opened the letter together. "They know who you are now. The stars have shifted. The vault is no longer safe. You must decide. Remain hidden, or return and reveal what must never be forgotten." Oren unwrapped the velvet. The blade shimmered silver blue, and carved across its hilt was a single name. Oren. The name she had never been allowed to speak. She held the sword like a memory sharpened into metal, and in that moment the truth didn't just wake, it roared. The sword felt heavy in her hands, not because of its weight. It was lighter than she expected, but because of what it meant. Oren hadn't just found her name, she had found her responsibility, and it terrified her. She could have stayed. The sanctuary was still safe. The Isari had not locked her in, not once. Their silence was never a cage, but something deeper than obedience had kept her there all these years. Something harder to name. It was the belief that she was only alive because she had stayed hidden. Now she understood the truth. She had stayed hidden because someone else had benefited from her silence. She left that same night. Calla by her side. No ceremony, no final words from the Isari, only nods. As if they had been waiting for this moment since the day she arrived. Maybe they had. Maybe that had always been the real prophecy. Not the words of the seer, but the moment when Oren chose her own story. They traveled through the northern forests first, jagged pine woods and forgotten trails, cold wind biting their skin. They traveled in secret, using old smuggler paths and listening for whispers in the villages. The closer they got to Eldrin's capital, the more rumors they heard. The king was dying, the royal court was fracturing, and beneath the palace, the vault had been breached. That last rumor hit hardest, because the vault was more than just a room full of secrets. It was the last piece of power Queen Sorella had protected. The records it contained, alliances, betrayals, debts, birthrights, had the power to start or end wars. And now, someone had broken into it. But no one was saying who. They reached the capital after 12 days, disguised, dirty, exhausted. It no longer looked like the city from Calla's stories. There were guards on every gate. Traders from rival cities parked their caravans outside the walls like vultures waiting for a carcass. The nobles rarely showed their faces. The court was unraveling. Oren stood beneath the shadow of the east gate and felt something cold crawl up her spine. This was the place she had been born to serve, and it didn't even know she existed. They snuck into the lower quarter, hiding in an abandoned watchtower near the river. Calla disappeared for a day to gather food and intelligence. Oren sat alone for the first time in weeks, staring at the sword. What had her mother meant by, "They know who you are now"? Who was they? Enemies of the court? The council? Foreign spies? Or worse, someone inside the palace? Calla returned at dawn, pale and breathless. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "Your name, it's already in the rumors." Oren didn't move. "They don't know it's you," Calla continued. "But there's talk of a missing royal. A girl hidden by the queen. Some say she died. Some say she's a threat. Some say she's the key to the vault." "And what do you say?" Oren asked quietly. Calla's eyes didn't waver. "I say, it's time to find out what they're so afraid of." They went to the one place no one would expect them to go, the city archive. It was supposed to be locked. It wasn't. Someone had broken in recently. Parchment littered the floor. Bookcases had been turned over. Most of the shelves were empty. But behind a false wall in the rear chamber, Calla found a scroll case, sealed in wax and wrapped in a chain bearing the queen's mark. They cracked the seal. Inside was a record, one single document. Oren's birth certificate. Signed, witnessed, hidden, and attached to it. A second scroll. It wasn't official. It wasn't even legible at first. Just fragmented lines and strange symbols. But Calla recognized one thing: coordinates. Deep beneath the palace. The vault. They weren't just supposed to protect it. They were supposed to return to it. Not to keep it sealed, but to reclaim it. "I think this was her plan," Calla said. "All along, she knew the court would fracture. She knew someone would come for the truth. And she knew you'd be the only one who could walk in without being destroyed." Oren felt the blood rush in her ears. For years, she had believed her life was small, fragile, a flame flickering in the wind, needing constant protection. But now? Now she realized she wasn't the candle. She was the match. And someone had spent their entire life making sure she never struck. The next morning, they slipped into the palace under the chaos of a mourning procession. One of the king's cousins had died suddenly, a distraction large enough to cloak their movements. The vault was guarded by only 2 men. They were asleep. Not from negligence. From poison. Someone else had been here first. The gate was already ajar. They stepped inside. The corridor sloped downward, torchless, cold. The air smelled of rot and dust. Oren clutched the sword tighter. Its weight no longer felt strange. She was no longer walking into her past. She was walking into the reason she had survived. The vault door was massive, carved from black stone, etched in warnings in languages long dead. But the lock was missing, removed. They pushed. Inside, there were no gold coins, no relics, just shelves, rows and rows of scrolls, maps, tomes, records of marriages, wars, betrayals, and at the far end, a pedestal. On it sat a single book, not dusty, not old, recently touched. Calla moved toward it, but Oren stopped her. This was what they were waiting for, the reason her name had been buried. And the moment she opened that book, she would no longer be a secret. She would be a spark, and kingdoms would burn. She hesitated, not because she was afraid of what was in the book, but because she knew the moment she opened it, there would be no turning back, no hiding again, no living quietly at the edge of a kingdom that barely remembered her. The moment the truth touched daylight, it would change everything. And that was the part that scared her. Not the change, the responsibility. Calla's voice was steady behind her. "If we open it, we don't close it." Oren nodded. "That's the point." She reached out. The leather was warm, not with magic, but with presence. Someone had touched it recently, someone who had wanted it found. The book had no title, no crest, just the royal sigil burned into the cover, but inverted. A sun turned inward, a sign once used in the time of Eldrin's first war, when truth was more dangerous than swords. She opened it slowly. The first page was blank. Then words began to appear, not in ink, but in light, as if written from inside the parchment. This is the record of the pact that founded Eldrin, sealed in blood, paid in silence, protected by heirs. If you read this, you are one of them, and your peace is a lie. Calla leaned closer. Your mother wrote this? No, Oren whispered. This was written long before her. They turned the pages. Each one told a story not found in any library, a history hidden on purpose. Eldrin was not founded by noble blood and peace treaties as the kingdom had always claimed. It was born from a deal, one made in secret between 5 rival houses, all of whom had committed atrocities during the empire's collapse centuries earlier. The founders had agreed to bury their crimes, literal massacres, stolen heirs, and betrayals, in exchange for peace. The vault was built not to protect wisdom, but to hide guilt. Each generation had chosen one child to be the vessel, the one meant to inherit the truth and carry it silently. Not a queen, not a king, a sleeper, someone kept away from court, trained quietly and preserved, just in case the truth ever tried to escape. And Oren, she was the last. She was the final vessel. Her mother, Queen Cirella, had broken the pact, refused to pass on the lie, refused to bind her daughter to a life of silence, and so she forged a new plan, to awaken the truth instead of bury it again. Oren's name had never been meant to be known. It was meant to be detonated. Calla was shaking. This isn't just history. This is leverage, blackmail, treason. This is why they killed her, Oren said quietly. She tried to destroy the pact. They reached the final page. It was a letter. Unlike the rest of the glowing script, this was written by hand, in Cirella's careful strokes. If you are reading this, they have failed to keep you asleep. You are not a prisoner. You are a match. I did not raise you to be hidden. I raised you to burn. Below the signature was a sigil neither girl recognized, 2 blades crossing a sun. Oren stared at it for a long time. Then she closed the book. Calla whispered, So, what now? Oren didn't answer at first. She stepped back into the vault's center, eyes sweeping over the scrolls and shelves, the artifacts of silence. For hundreds of years, this place had been the kingdom's spine, the thing that held it upright, but it was built on lies. She turned to Calla. Now we let them know it's real. It didn't take long. By the next morning, the court was buzzing, whispers of a breach, of a girl with fire in her voice and steel in her hand. Someone had seen them slip out. A page had overheard a name. And suddenly, the nobles remembered. They remembered the queen's child who was never buried, the rumors, the closed coffins, the sealed records, the rider who vanished, the sword with no heir. The royal council called an emergency session. The king, too weak to stand, remained in his private chambers, and the court, hungry and fractured, debated in shadows. Some demanded the girl be arrested, others wanted her protected or silenced. But before they could act, she walked into the great hall herself. No guards, no mask, just her and Calla, dust-covered and flame-eyed. She didn't kneel. She placed the book at the center of the chamber and said only this: The truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs the door opened. They tried to deny her, tried to call her a fraud, a threat. But she had brought more than the book. She had brought names, documents, ledgers that tied council members to erased debts, secret assassinations, and land stolen during the founding years. Proof, not prophecy. That's what made her dangerous. not her blood, her clarity. And then the king's chamber doors opened. For the first time in weeks, he appeared, frail, cloaked, but alive. He looked at her for a long time, and when he finally spoke, it was not as a ruler. It was as a man who had spent his whole life protecting a mistake. "You are her daughter," he said. "Sirella's fire, her echo dot." "I am myself," Oren replied. And that was when he bowed his head. Not in defeat, but in relief. He stepped aside. And for the first time in Eldrin's history, the truth was spoken in the open. Not by kings, but by the girl they had once tried to erase. The truth did not bring applause. It brought silence. Thick, choking silence that settled over Eldrin like winter fog. No bells rang, no horns sounded. There were no proclamations from the castle walls, no celebratory feasts. Just a kingdom holding its breath, unsure whether it had just been saved or set on fire. The day Oren stood in the great hall and spoke the truth, the walls of power trembled, not because of her voice, but because of how calm it was. There was no fury, no dramatics. She simply laid the truth before them like an open wound, raw and undeniable. She named the pact, named the families who signed it, showed the evidence buried beneath centuries of noble lies. Then she told them she had no intention of wearing a crown. They didn't know what to do with that, because kings and queens, even the cruel ones, were easy to manage. You bribed them, flattered them, threatened them, but someone who didn't want the throne, someone who refused power and still held more of it than anyone else in the room, that was terrifying. She walked out of the chamber with her head high, her eyes steady, and for the first time in her life the guards bowed as she passed. The next morning, the streets of the capital were covered in parchment. Not royal decrees, not official letters, but copies of the names Oren had spoken, the founding families, the pact, the secrets they buried, posted on walls, pinned to doors, scattered through the markets. People stopped to read them, some in disbelief, some in horror, some with bitter satisfaction, as if they'd always suspected the world wasn't as noble as it pretended to be. Oren stayed in the old watchtower by the river. She refused the royal chambers, refused the carriages, the escorts, the attendants. The people began to call her the Wakewalker, the girl who had slept through a lie and risen to undo it. She received dozens of letters each day. Some were grateful, survivors of wars long buried by court historians, daughters of housemaids who had disappeared, scholars who had been exiled for asking too many questions. Others were cruel, threats, condemnations, calls for silence. Some accused her of destabilizing the kingdom. Others accused her of being a witch. She read every letter. Calla urged her to be careful. "You're stirring hornets," she warned one night. "You're forcing the nobles to look into a mirror they spent centuries avoiding. They won't all accept what they see." Oren nodded. "Then let them break the glass." She didn't respond with anger. She responded with law. She drafted the Transparency Proclamation, a decree that would make the vault's contents public over time, with each piece verified, archived, and preserved. It would strip noble families of their inherited secrets and make history something anyone could study, not just a weapon for the powerful. The council tried to block it. She didn't flinch. She stood again before them and recited word for word the confessions in the book. The false land grants, the betrayal of loyal generals, the hidden bloodlines. She named a duke who had purchased the silence of a priest, a baron who had burned down 3 villages during a rebellion, and been rewarded with land for blaming the invaders. Every name matched a document. Every accusation had proof. And slowly, the council fell quiet, because this wasn't rebellion anymore. It was reality. They passed the proclamation, narrowly, bitterly, but it passed, and Eldrin changed, not all at once, not with celebration, but with reckoning. University doors reopened to commoners. Archives were flooded with researchers. Former soldiers began to speak openly about what they had seen and been forced to forget. Historians no longer wrote to please the court. They wrote to preserve truth. There were protests, debates, tensions flared. A rebellion tried to rise in the West, but crumbled when its leader's name appeared on one of Oren's parchments. And through it all, she remained steady. She did not parade herself through the capital. She met with no foreign kings. She had no crown, no court, no throne. Just her sword, her voice, and the shadow of her mother's final words etched into her mind. "I did not raise you to be hidden. I raised you to burn." Some people asked her to run for the throne. She refused. She told them, "I don't want to rule what I can rebuild. Let others wear jewels. I'll wear memory." But there was one final thing left undone: the pact itself. Though its details were public, the contract had never been destroyed. The original agreement, signed in blood and bound in silence, still sat in the vault, untouched. Bound in iron, protected by magic older than the kingdom itself. It had to be ended. So she went alone, back beneath the palace, through the vault doors to the pedestal where it waited. The pages shimmered. The ink pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. She didn't burn it. She read it. Every word. Because to destroy a lie, you must first know the shape of it. And when she finished, she drew her sword and sliced the contract in two. Not violently, not in rage, just with finality, as if she were cutting a chain. That night, the city bells rang. Not for a death, not for a coronation, but for a beginning. They say history sleeps until someone wakes it. But in Eldrin, history had never been asleep. It had been drugged, wrapped in silks, locked in vaults, rewritten with golden ink until no one could tell what was real and what was legend. For centuries, the kingdom believed its peace came from wisdom and neutrality. They believed they were better than the wars that raged around them. But what they never asked was who paid the price for that illusion. When Oren tore the pact in half, she didn't just end a contract, she ended an era. The parchment crumbled like dead leaves in her hands. No spell screamed, no storm struck. There was no magic backlash, no collapse of walls. The power of the pact hadn't come from ancient curses. It had come from silence. And now, that silence was broken. The days that followed were quiet. Not out of fear, but reverence. A kingdom doesn't know how to celebrate its own rebirth. There are no parades for shame, no horns for accountability. But there were moments, small ones. A child asking her mother why her textbooks now told a different story. A librarian opening a sealed wing for the first time in 40 years. A royal archivist admitting he'd once destroyed a record and now wanted to help rebuild. Oren walked the city in a plain cloak. No guards, no announcement. People didn't bow to her. They nodded, looked her in the eye, whispered thanks without words. That was all she ever wanted. She could have stayed. Could have built a new court, reformed the nobility, sat in gilded halls and received praise from foreign ambassadors. But she didn't. She gathered her things, packed the sword her mother left, and vanished. No one knows exactly when she left the capital. No one saw her carriage. There was no note, no goodbye. One day she was there, the wake walker, the girl who broke the lie, and the next, she was gone. Some say she returned to the forest sanctuary where she grew up. Others say she wandered west, into the mountains, to help forgotten villages heal from what the nobles had done to them. A few believe she joined the border scholars and began teaching children the histories they were never allowed to read. But one thing was clear. She had no interest in being a queen of stone. She had only ever wanted to be a queen of fire, and fires move, they don't settle. Years passed. Eldrin did not become perfect. It did not become easy, but it became honest. The truth Oren unleashed could not be undone. New leaders rose, ones shaped by her words, her actions, her refusal to bow. A school was built in the capital named The Wake. It was the first of its kind, open to anyone, noble or not. Its motto carved in stone: "You cannot unlearn the truth." Children there read the pact as history, not myth. They knew the names of the forgotten. They understood the cost of silence, and they carried Oren's legacy not as a story, but as a lesson. One day, many years after she vanished, a traveler found a sword buried in the roots of a lightning-struck tree. It was rusted, quiet, but the name on its hilt was still visible: Oren. They say she left it there on purpose, not because she was finished fighting, but because she didn't need it anymore. She had already won. And now comes Uncle Luke. Sit with this for a moment, let it settle in your chest. You see, they told us Sleeping Beauty was cursed by a witch. They told us she was helpless, waiting for a prince to save her. But what they didn't tell us, what they couldn't admit, was that the real curse wasn't magic. It was fear. Fear of what would happen if a girl knew too much. Fear of what might break if she started asking questions. Fear of what would be lost if she ever woke up. But Oren didn't need a kiss to rise. She needed a reason. And once she found it, she didn't wait for anyone's permission. She didn't just reclaim her name, she reclaimed history. And maybe that's the part we need to hear most. That the real Sleeping Beauty wasn't asleep. She was kept that way. By comfort, by design, by people who said they were protecting her, when really, they were protecting themselves. So here's Uncle Luke's message to you. If they ever try to tell you to wait quietly, if they ever tell you it's safer not to know, if they say you're too young, too loud, too much trouble, remember, Oren, remember that peace built on silence isn't peace at all. And when they lock the truth away in a vault, don't knock. Burn the door down. Subscribe to Uncle Luke Tells for stories that weren't meant to survive, and voices that refuse to be buried. Like, comment, share, because someone out there is still sleeping in a lie. And maybe you're the one who'll wake them.